So, good evening and welcome to another week of 120 Dublin Stories with Santa Rita and the Little Museum of Dublin. So tonight we have got a series of talks that are specifically part of a collaboration with the National Museums Northern Ireland as part of a project called You Say You Love Me, But You Don't Even Know Me, which we're running in partnership with the Department of Foreign Affairs. So my guest joining me this evening is Dr. Michael Sims, the Senior Curator of Natural Sciences at the National Museums Northern Ireland. Mike, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure. No, good to be here.
Thank you so much. So I guess before I jump into the formal questions, I believe Thursday is a day for research and special projects.
Yes. Oh, for me, yes. Yeah. Every Thursday, I actually work with a couple of volunteers at our collection store, which is a few miles from the museum. And they are both trained geologists, and they just wanted to do something geological. So they come in one day a week and they're actually working through the collections, putting together an inventory of where all the fossils are. And they're really, really good because they are trained geologists. They know their stuff, and they're both really smart. And so, frankly, they're doing a much, much better job than me. And of course, I'm there just in case they need anything, but I can also get on with sort of various little projects, research projects I've been working on various fossils in the collections. I've been working on one of those for a few months now. But yeah, the two volunteers, Emma and Sophie, are really, really brilliant. Self-propelling, I say. They just get on and they do it with really very little input from me. They don't need it.
Well, what do they say? Surround yourself with good people. It's the key to success. But
yes.
So I guess, Mike, just to kind of to set the scene, you know, your role within the National Museum's NI is that you're the Senior Curator of Natural Sciences.
Yes.
Give me a little bit of a sense of the scope of what your collection actually entails.
Well, actually, when I first arrived, which is 25 years ago, more than 25 years ago, I arrived as Curator of Paleontology because I was really originally a paleontologist. From the age of 6, I was a paleontologist. I was interested in fossils. But over the years, I've become interested in much broader aspects of geology, mineralogy, and meteorites and tectonics, all that sort of stuff, and the landscape. And then I become interested in even wider aspects of natural history, particularly lichens and bryophytes, which is lichen mosses and liverworts and things. And I'm interested in millipedes and snails. And in fact, the museum collections embrace all of these things. We have huge collection of fossils, huge collections of minerals, rocks, a vast herbarium, nearly 100 cabinets of basically kind of pressed flowers and plants, things like that, and thousands of lichens. A lot of taxidermy from mostly kind of 19th century, early 20th century birds, mammals, reptiles, skeletons, all sorts. So it is hundreds of thousands of specimens. I think we did a kind of vague sort of audit recently. We reckon there's probably about 450,000 specimens in total. So, and I'm responsible really for the geology. So the rocks, minerals, fossils, meteorites.
Okay, well, you definitely, gosh, what a scale of a collection.
Yeah,
and
a lot of space.
Like when you're thinking about your work and your collection, is there one or two pieces that you're kind of that are really the most significant to you? I'm at pains to say your favorite pieces, but what do you find most interesting?
My favorite pieces. Well, there are some things that are really important to Ireland, you know, to everybody in Ireland. So of course there's the Irish dinosaur bones. Ireland has 2 fragments of dinosaur bone, which are both from the very early Jurassic, about 200 million years old. And they were both found by a retired school teacher back, well, the first one was found more than 40 years ago. And it was very, very good fossil collector. And he donated them to the museum, and we published a paper on those a couple of years ago. And they're 2 different dinosaurs, even though they were found on the same beach. So you think, oh, they're going to be bits of the same dinosaur. And they're not. Even though they're rather scrappy bits of bone, I involved a couple of experts, because I'm not an expert on dinosaurs, and they were able to confirm what I suspected was these are 2 separate dinosaurs. So in an Irish context, a broader Irish context, not just looking at what's my favorite, these are very, very important specimens because they're the only dinosaurs that we have.
What do we know about them?
Sorry?
What do we know about them? Do we know anything?
Oh, yes. Well, one of them is part of a femur, an upper leg bone of a four-legged plant-eating dinosaur that kind of was covered with spikes. It was a prickly sort of animal called Stylidosaurus. And if you're a rather slow-moving plant-eating dinosaur and there are things around with big teeth that might eat you, it's a good idea to cover yourself with bony spikes and things. So that's what Stylidosaurus did. But all we've got is just a fragment of one of the upper leg bones. And you might think, you know, how can you possibly tell? What we do is what's called comparative anatomy. We compare that fragment of bone with bones that we know belong to the animal because they were complete skeletons known from rocks of the same age in Dorset. So that was the one of them. And then the other one is part of the, lower leg bone, hind leg of a two-legged meat-eating dinosaur. So it might be one of the ones that was chasing around your Stylidosaurus, you see.
There.
Yeah, so and this is a thing that we think might be related to a dinosaur called Sarcosaurus. And they're not really, when you look at them, you think, oh, you know, how did Roger Byrne was a brilliant fossil collector. He died in 2007. Brilliant. He donated lots of stuff to the museum. And you think, how did he ever spot these things? So they're not big, spectacular things like the American dinosaurs, but they're important because there are not many dinosaurs known from this period of time, around about 200 million years old. And we have these in Ireland. So they're quite exciting. But in terms of my own favourites, oh, goodness. Well, one of my favourites is actually one that I didn't buy. The museum bought it. My pockets aren't that deep. Is a fossil fish called Xiphactinus with an X. And it's so big. If I stretch my arms out like that, it's more than twice as wide as, actually 3 times as wide. It's a huge thing. It's about 12 feet, 4 meters long. Huge thing from Chalk in Kansas, from about 80 million years old, and it's got serious teeth in it. It's a sort of fish that is a small dinosaur that found itself swimming around. You know, and I came across that on the internet. I used to search Google Xiphactinus for sale because I thought we should have one because it's a fantastic thing to inspire people to be interested in the past. And there was one. So we got that. So that's one of my favorite things, really. I went looking and I found it. We got it.
But it's interesting, sorry, that you say that that this kind of fossil was a way to engage people to be interested in the past. Like, I think an interesting responsibility that we collectively have is to not simply to build these collections, but to actually cultivate a relationship with the wider public. And I wonder, how do you take on that responsibility? How do you see your role?
Well, one of the things that I do, for instance, you know, the museum has a budget to acquire things, and pretty much everything that I've used my budget for has actually been for display specimens rather than, say, things that research. I've got more than enough things to research on that I have found myself or other people have found. But I try and spend the money on really spectacular things that people think, oh my goodness, so people wouldn't think a fish could get that big. You know, it's huge. It's a fish the size of a dinosaur. So it changes people's perception of what the past was like. And other things the museum has bought recently is actually a big chunk of the moon. Well, not compared with the moon. It's the size of the palm of my hand, you know. And again, that will go on display to sort of say, these are pieces of the moon that have actually come here to Earth from the moon, not being brought here. They've come of their own accord. Big meteorite hits the moon, flings bits off into space. Some of those land on Earth. So I try and use exciting objects that people can think, oh, wow, that's amazing. And also telling interesting stories. So my favorite exhibition of all the exhibitions I've ever worked on is called The Elements. And it's a look at the periodic table, which a lot of people might think is rather dry and dusty. You know, remember on the walls in chemistry labs or whatever. But this actually is an exploration of all the different elements and where you find them. And it's got all sorts of odd things in it, little quirky things, things that people are familiar with, but are not necessarily familiar with that element in the object. So anybody who's using one of these iPad thingies now, they will be very familiar with an element called indium. They might not think they are, but the touch screen is indium tin oxide. So again, there's an element that most people have never heard of, and yet most people are using it all the time, unknowingly. So the exhibition sort of explores lots and lots of themes like that to try and pull out the fact there were things you don't know about that are very sort of central to your life. And then there's lots and lots of quirky things. There's a thing we bought called the Atomic Energy Lab. It's like a chemistry set from 1950-51. It was only ever produced for 2 years because it was really expensive and really complicated. Most kids, if they were lucky enough to get one, because it was so expensive, would have thought, what? So there were never many of them. And it's got fantastic graphics on it. Early 1950s, the dawn of the nuclear age. And there's this kid on the front looking at it, wow. And it's full of things. It had radioactive samples in it.
Modern health and safety wouldn't go for that.
No, a cloud chamber, which you can see little radioactive particles zinging through the cloud. And then it has a Geiger counter, presumably to check how radioactive you've become. And it's sometimes called the most radioactive toy of all time. It wasn't, it wasn't actually that dangerous. But again, it's a lovely thing, and it draws people into the museum to see, unexpected things that and widen their knowledge without being kind of too heavy about it. I don't want to be too educational. You want to sort of inform people without them even realizing that they're being educated.
Learning by stealth, isn't that it?
Yeah, very much so. So I do a lot of that whenever I can.
It's an incredible thing, and I think we've had an immense privilege of exploring, kind of getting to see little parts of your collection over the course of our collaboration. I do remember a few particularly memorable experiences, but I guess kind of we come back to the meteorite maybe and kind of use that as kind of a starting point. Like so obviously the Little Museum, the National Museums, and I have been collaborating on this exhibition that's been in Dublin now for the last probably 2 months at this stage almost, which has been an incredible opportunity, something we've been really very proud to be collaborating on. But I guess when it was agreed this was a project we were going to take on together, I wonder, how did you actually think about what artifacts you were going to bring to Dublin for display and why they were relevant?
Yes. Well, one of the things, there were the two things that I was really sort of involved in. One was the giant deer, which is called the Irish elk. But the thing is, it was not exclusively Irish. It wandered right across kind of Northern Europe and Asia. So, and it wasn't an elk. An elk is a completely different animal. Elk is the moose. In Canada and North America, it's called the moose. In Europe, it's called the elk. And in North America, the elk is actually the red deer, which is why we give animals Latin names. So the elk is Alces, and the red deer is Cervus elephas, you see. So you make sure you don't get confused. Anyway, so the Irish elk isn't an elk and it isn't Irish. It's a giant deer. And its closest living relative is actually the fallow deer. And the Irish elk has ridiculously big antlers. The reason it's called the Irish elk is because a lot of skeletons, and particularly the skulls, which are really, really impressive things, have been found in Ireland. It's a really good place for them to be preserved in some of the little lakes that existed in early post-glacial times. The ice had gone, the landscape was kind of closed with grass and sort of lowly shrubs, ideal for an animal with big antlers. Forests are terrible. If you've got antlers that stick out 3 meters, forests are a really, really bad place. So really, I would say the majority of the specimens you see in the museums around the world have actually come from Ireland, particularly a place called Ballybeat Bog, which is a bit south of Dublin. So that's, and lots of them being found in the north. It's on the Northern Ireland coat of arms. If you go up to Stormont and you look carefully on some of the railings around there, you'll see little tiny giant deer heads. They're a bit distorted, but there they are. So it's it's the iconic mammal
Mm.
for Ireland, and it's extinct. And so we couldn't lend you a whole skull because they're really big, and you're a little museum. So what we did do, I think we lent you, did we lend you a piece of one, a part of a skull, I think, but also
Painting.
the painting. Julian Friars is a fantastic wildlife artist. He's very, very well known. He's been known for decades for his fantastic paintings of birds. And a few years ago, he got into painting extinct birds like the great auk and things like that. And he came to see me because he wanted to find out a bit more about the habitats, the environments these things lived in. And he and I got talking, and I just sort of said, wow, have you thought about painting some other extinct animals? Because we had Dippy the dinosaur coming to the Ulster Museum, and I wanted to do a Ireland's Lost Monsters thing, but I needed images, and I thought, well, you could go to the internet and you get a hodgepodge of things. And Julian's brilliant. He's a really, really nice guy. He's really easy to get on with. And he thought, yeah, that sounds good. So he went away and he started churning out these paintings, which are fantastic, really, really nice. Yeah, this iconic animal. So that was one. To my mind, it was a bit of a no-brainer. It's the iconic Irish animal. There's lots from in Northern Ireland. It's linked to Stormont, and then we've got this fantastic painting by Julian. So that was one of them.
And it's funny actually, because I remember when I saw the list of artifacts that were proposed to be going into this exhibition, and I saw the fact that the giant deer was going to be included. It just seemed very, interesting, the fact that this was a cross-border project. This was a collaboration that was looking at this idea, you say you love me, but you don't even know me, getting to know the neighbors. An animal couldn't care less where there's a border.
Yep, absolutely right. And that's one of the things that Julian and I have from the Dippy exhibition. He painted 10 paintings for the Dippy exhibition, which included mammoth and giant deer and great auk, and I can't remember what they are now. And then he painted another 10, and the museum acquired these 20 paintings, and then he kept going. And he keeps, and we've been touched quite a lot, and we've been writing a book on it, you see, which is no longer kind of Lost Monsters. It's much more than that, you see. And he'll sort of send me a WhatsApp picture. He said, "Oh, Mike, I've just painted another one." I think, "Oh no, it's just like you can't keep up with your homework." He just, I got to write about this as well. So we've been working together on this. And one of the things that he's written is saying that these animals, they know no border. And so talking about, a lot of, there'll be big estates where there's no trespassing, things like that, but animals just don't take any notice of that. They just go where they need to go. So, and the giant deer was very definitely one of those.
And I wonder, sorry, this is not something I planned on talking about, but you kind of have me curious. What's the animal you find most fascinating, extinct or hopefully still around today?
Oh goodness! I don't know, because each of them have their sort of fascination. My particular fascination, my PhD was on a group of animals called crinoids, which those of a certain age might remember the crinoids from episodes of Doctor Who with Tom Baker, I think. But anyway, they're nothing like that. Crinoids are actually related to starfishes and sea urchins, and they're sometimes called sea lilies because they look like a plant. They have a stalk, and then they have a sort of a little cup, and then they have arms which filter out plankton, you see. And I did my PhD on them, and I was interested in them when I was a school kid, which is why I did my PhD in them. I came up with this project. And so I was still sort of fascinated by those creatures, I think, trying to work out, how they lived and how they were all related. So, and ammonites are the other thing that I really love. Ammonites have the extinct kind of Jurassic Cretaceous things. They have a curly sort of shell, and they're basically the shell of an animal that was related to squid and octopus. Right. But yeah, each animal has its own fascination. As Julian and I have been doing this project, and I've been delving into various animals, you find all sorts of fascinating things about them. Like, there was a drawing or painting done by a guy called Victor Denoyer, who was a brilliant watercolor artist, worked for the Geological Survey in the 19th century. He painted a hippo tooth, that was supposedly was found up near Carrickfergus, and it is unmistakably a hippo tooth. And it was claimed this was found in the sort of bank of a river near Carrickfergus. So if so, we know hippos lived in Britain 125,000 years ago. So were hippos in Ireland? So Julian, of course, painted some hippos in Belfast Loch. Fantastic painting. And but then it was a case of, yeah, but could they have actually got here? Because, of course, the Irish Sea is in the way. Hippos don't like it cold. They kind of trotted across when the Irish Sea was covered with ice because they really don't like frost at all. So, yeah, so then we're sort of trying to figure out, well, was this a genuine discovery or is there something a bit dodgy about it? And I thought, well, of course, okay, so the Irish Sea may have flooded as sea level rose after the end of the Ice Age, the previous Ice Age, but hippos can swim. We all know that hippos can swim, don't we? But they can't. You think a hippo can swim? It can't. A hippo is actually a bit on the dense side. If you drop a hippo off a ship in the middle of the Atlantic, it'll just keep going down to the bottom. So, so when you see them, sort of, they're just pogoing along on the riverbed. So it's little discoveries like that, which I find fascinating.
And are there people mapping kind of chronologically the evolution of animals and how they are actually arriving in different lands over time? There must be.
Yes. So in Britain, for instance, we had lots and lots of animals that came into Britain after the ice, during the Ice Age, and after there were cold periods called glacials and warmer periods called interglacial. So if we go back 125,000 years, we're between two ice ages, warm period. And that's when hippos were living in Britain, you see. And we know they could get across from Europe because the English Channel wasn't there at that time. The English Channel didn't appear till about 8,000 years ago. So lots of things could just come across. But Ireland's different. Ireland has the Irish Sea, and the Irish Sea had been there a long time. And ice, when there's an ice age, very cold period, lots of water is locked up in those ice sheets. So sea level might fall by 120 meters. So you think, well, things just trot along the bottom of the Irish Sea. But they can't because it's cold if you're a hippo. And then when the ice starts melting again, sea level rises. So you have a very, very narrow window between the ice disappearing from Ireland and actually things being able to get over there before the Irish Sea is flooded again. So that's why there's an awful lot of things we don't have. There are no moles, no weasels, no snakes, of course. And lots of things we don't actually have because they were just too slow to get here. The giant deer could get here because it didn't mind it being a bit cold and it trots along. Big animal could easily get 60, 70, 80 kilometers across the Irish Sea. But a lot of animals, if they're a bit sensitive to the cold, they couldn't make it. Or if they're a bit small and slow moving, they just missed the boat, literally.
Quite literally, yeah. And then I guess, so that's looking to the ground. I guess looking upwards, one thing you mentioned earlier is you started talking about the moon, you started talking about the meteorites. And I know this is something that we do have kind of included in the exhibition here in Dublin at the moment. So I wonder, could you tell us about what happened in 1902?
Oh, yes, this was the Kremlin meteorite. This was the other object which I thought really you've got to have, because meteorites falling to Earth is an incredibly rare event. There are only 8 meteorite falls in the whole of Ireland where we've actually got things. Now, we know there must have been quite a lot more that have fallen, small ones, but of course, they land in a field, nobody notices. So there's only ever 8 have been found in more than 200 years. And one of them was in 1902, 13th of September, just north of the town of Crumlin. That's Crumlin in County Antrim, not Crumlin on the outskirts of Dublin. So a very different Crumlin. And there were some people working in the fields there, and they heard this sort of sound of this thing, and then they sort of heard various bangs. And then one of them actually saw this thing kind of land in this wheat field, a great cloud of dust sort of go up. And they went over and recovered this thing from this hole, and it was a meteorite weighed 9¾ pounds, which in new money is about 4.2 kilograms. And this was the Crumlin meteorite, and 13th of September that was, 1902. But within a week, a chap had come over from the British Museum, as it was then, and he had whisked it away back to England, where it has been ever since, much to the consternation of a lot of people in Ireland. Actually thought this was very bad. There was a cartoon in the Irish Weekly Independence and Nation, and it had this rather rotund John Bull. In hot pursuit was I think he was called Paddy. Terrible stereotype, but anyway, chasing after John Bull, saying, you know, bring back our meteorite. Yeah, so I mean, that was one of the things that really should have sort of stayed in Ireland, and in fact it is coming back to Northern Ireland in September. The Naturalist Museum, who of course now own it, are lending it to us for a couple of years, 2.5 years, something like that. So the actual thing will go on display. So what you have in the museum, the little museum, is actually a cast of what the Crumlin meteorite looked like before bits were cut off it, because bits are being cut off for analysis and science and exchange with other museums. So the one you have is actually as it was when it landed in 1902.
We might have to take a day trip up to you in September.
Oh, you should, yes, because we'll make a big thing of it, because it'll be the 120th anniversary on the 13th of September. And like I say, people tend to sort of be a bit glib about meteorites, saying, "Oh, this is that's a meteorite," but it's an astonishingly rare event. We know from camera footage of fireballs and things and where meteorites have fallen, we can estimate that one meteorite of sort of walnut-sized or bigger lands on each square kilometre of the Earth's surface about once every 10,000 years. That's the average.
Wow.
So I'm trying to think what Ireland is about. What is it? I'm coming down really. Anyway, we should expect more meteorites, but we shouldn't expect too many in that time. So the Crumlin meteorite to fall and be found was really, you know, an extraordinary event. And it's come from, it's come from the asteroid belt. It's come down at quite a rate of knots. It would have, when it hit the atmosphere, it probably would have been doing 15 to 20 kilometers a second. That's 30 to 40,000 miles an hour, which is quite fast. So it heats the air up around it. So really, really brilliant fireball. The air gets heated up to about 4,000 degrees centigrade. So it's white hot. And also it's going so fast, that's sonic boom. So the workers in the field, they heard this sort of bang, 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 you know, as this thing came down. And they variously thought it was a boiler exploding in a mill, you know, in Crumlin and various other things, steam train exploding.
Quite a sensory experience. But even, because I remember you were telling me previously about a project called, is it Our Place in Space?
Oh, Our Place in Space. Actually, that's another reason to come up to the north in September. Yes, what it is, Our Place in Space is actually looking. It's a project between Oliver Jeffers, who's an artist, and Stephen Smart, who's an astrophysicist at Queen's University, and the Nerve Centre, who in Derry, and they've worked together and they've produced this sort of sculpture trail type thing, which puts the solar system in context in scale. So you start off with the sun, which is this big sort of yellow thing, and it glows in the dark. It's got lights inside. It's about 3 meters across. And then you have to walk a few hundred yards to get to Mercury. And Mercury is like, this size. It's tiny, absolutely tiny. It's a big arch, so that because otherwise you wouldn't notice it, be a pea on the footpath. So there's a big arch saying Mercury, and then you go on another few hundred yards, and there's Venus, which is slightly bigger. And then you go on a few hundred yards more, and it's Earth, and then Mars. And when you get to the outer planets, so I went to see, it's in Derry at the moment along the Foyle. I think it's probably just about finishing in Derry. Now, then it goes to the Belfast Hills, Black Mountain, Divis, and then it goes to Cambridge. Then it comes to the Transport Museum in Coulter from 16th of September to 17th of October, or round about then. Check the dates. But I was in Derry a couple of weeks ago, and I got out of the train station, and there's one of these things right by the train station, and I thought, oh, that's good. So I went across to see it, and it was, I think it was Neptune anyway, and I thought, oh, I'll go and look at another one, and I saw it said no, Saturn, 2.65 kilometers. I thought, what? and the Neptune was this sort of size. It's putting it in this real scale of the solar system, because whenever we see it, it's all exaggerated. Yeah. And it just shows how utterly insignificant Earth and the other planets are in the scale of space. So it's a fantastic sort of installation. It will be up at the Transport Museum in Coulter, like mid-September to mid-October. There will be a display also somewhere in the Transport Museum of some of the new meteorites. We've got the pieces of Moon, pieces of Mars, and a couple of other really weird meteorites as well. So it's a fantastic project, because it really brings home what the solar system's like. It's not like you see it all in the books.
And sorry, just it sounds like an incredible project, and something I kind of personally genuinely looking forward to actually getting up to experience. But I kind of, when I was thinking about this conversation this evening, I was thinking about, the casual sentence of, well, you'll see a piece of Mars and a piece of the Moon. From a collection care and conservation perspective, what does it actually look like to take care of a piece of the Moon? I get my head around that.
Well, actually, the Moon and Mars are actually quite easy, because they're relatively inert rocks. The problematical meteorites are the ones that contain iron metal, and quite a few do. And so one of the ones that we're getting a slice of, which will go on display, which is my all-time favorite meteorite. I'm very excited to get. It's a slice, maybe a slice about this sort of size, but it's my all-time favorite meteorite. And it consists, if you imagine took a bag of ball bearings and marbles, and then you sort of had glue or resin sort of trickle down through them, and then you just took a slice through that. What you would see is lots and lots of little circles of different sizes of metal, and some of sort of what looks like glass. And that's what this thing looks like. It's a really, really weird meteorite. And there'll be a bit of an explanation as to why it looks so weird in the display. So that one contains iron. The thing about iron is that iron rusts on Earth. It's fine out in space. Space is very dry, but as soon as it arrives on Earth, the iron rusts. So they're the problematic ones. So there we need to keep the humidity low. But the Moon meteorite, no, they're easy. Moon and Mars is pretty easy, actually. So not too worried about those.
And when you're saying this iron-based one is your personal favorite meteorite, what is it aesthetically? Is it because of this kind of composition of it?
It's aesthetically, because it's so different from anything else. It's a wonderful looking thing. It has a really interesting kind of history as to how it formed, because the early solar system is completely different from what we see today. Is a bit boring, frankly. 8 planets, a lot of small bits. The asteroid belt. The early solar system had hundreds and hundreds of planets. And in the first few million years, quite a lot of those melted completely. So you had lots and lots of molten planets, which might be hundreds of kilometers across, all going around the sun, no traffic control. And of course, you're going to get collisions. And the collisions between 2 molten planets means you get huge amounts of stuff splashing out, molten metal, molten rock splashing out into space, which is cold and zero gravity. So it solidifies, cools down, solidifies as little beads of metal or rock. And then those subsequently, if kind of gravity has drawn them back together, and that's what we get. We get this weird meteorite called Gujba, fell in Nigeria in 1984. Is a record of these events, these molten planets colliding, splashing stuff out, and then it's going to come back again. But it's a lovely thing. So my favorite meteorite of all. So
yeah, sorry, your enthusiasm is infectious. It's really it's lovely to hear. It really is. And I know another thing that you're personally interested in is, and it's kind of from an environmental and kind of sustainable point of view, it's kind of, I remember being particularly fascinated reading about the peat postcards, which was someone trying to find a new
Yes, now that's moving into some areas that I'm not an expert on, but my wife is. She did a PhD in the history of papermaking in Ireland. And years ago, we came across these things, which is where there's a lot of peat in Ireland, turf, and a lot of that. And so somebody just thought, well, let's try and make paper from this, because there's a lot of it, and there's not so many trees and not so many linen. Good quality paper was made actually with out of rags. And one of the problems with the Irish in the 19th century is that they just wore their clothes until they were completely useless, even for making paper. So you could only make poor quality paper. So somebody thought, well, there's all this peat, and peat is kind of cellulose. We can perhaps make paper from this. So what they did was they mixed some of the peat with kind of the main parts of the paper, lignin from or cellulose from tree pulp, and they produced these things. And there were two mills, one at Selbridge, and I can't remember where the other one was. And they, it wasn't really a great success. It was pretty shoddy paper, frankly, but it became a thing that people would send to relatives abroad, in North America, whatever. And so, a bit of the old sod, it'll say, or something like that, a bit of old Ireland. And so a lot of these actually, and Alice, my wife and I bought. I started off, we came across one. I thought, oh, this is interesting. And then I thought, oh, there'll only be about half a dozen of them. So we buy these, and anyway, we've got about 150 of them now, and there's about 80 different ones. And occasionally I still come across new ones. So it was never a great success. It was early part of the 20th century, kind of 1905, 1910, something like that. And it became a sort of a quirky sort of thing that people would send to relatives, particularly at Christmas. Some of them were kind of, season's greetings from old Ireland, a bit of the old turf, as it were. Yeah. So people try their luck, will it work? Can I make paper out of this? And the answer was not really. So.
I think it's fascinating. I got so much enjoyment out of yourself and your wife, and hearing the stories, and actually just getting to see some of the different postcards. They really are. There's something special. But I guess I guess now that we're coming to the point where, like, the project we've been working on together has, it was a long time in the making, and the pandemic ensured it was a longer time.
Plague got in the way. Yes.
It's funny how the world works. But now that we're at the point where, we have some of the treasures from the National Museums and I in the little museum and on display, in your opinion, why are collaborations like this important? Why should we, museum by museum or city by city, why should we be collaborating?
Well, I do think, because quite often, the National Museums own an awful lot of stuff which doesn't get out on display that other places would love to see. I mean, the Crumlin meteorite is a case in point. It's been sitting in a cupboard in London for 120 years. Yet in Northern Ireland, it will be I was going to say a star attraction, because it will be. It was one of only 3 meteorites that, one fell in 1844 in Killatting, County Tyrone, Crumlin in 1902, and then there was one Bovidi, which fell in County Derry, 1969. So we've only got 3. So it's a really, really exciting thing. So I think it's an opportunity to, it's a great opportunity, collaborating, because we can lend things to museums where the people in that area will think, oh, wow, this is sort of fantastic. So it's a chance to get items from our collections out. And I just think it's generally a good thing to work with. I'd love to sort of do more of this sort of stuff with you people, because I think it would be this is the start, and I think there's an awful lot more things we could do. There's lots and lots of themes that you can think of that, kind of cross-border collaborations, things that are the same but not, so the opportunities are endless. So I think it is really, really good. So I'm very pleased when we got asked to do these sorts of things. I mean, one thing, here's a suggestion. We have a small periodic table of little cubes, about 4 centimeters across, with samples in. And we did do one exhibition at Carrickfergus Museum, basically rummaging through the things they had and then putting together an exhibition, like a mini version of the Elements exhibition, but with their objects. And so interpreting their objects in terms of the elements and compounds and things like that. And it's something that could be done at almost any museum that has almost any stuff. You can do this. So, one to think about.
Yeah, where you have stuff, you have elements.
Yes.
It's fascinating. So I had a conversation earlier today about the scientific and kind of engineering accomplishments that have occurred here in Dublin, and there is
oh yes, yes, that is one to definitely to do, is actually scientists of all sorts, and just celebrating those. I mean, I'm just thinking off the top of my head, Matilda Knowles. I don't know if you know Matilda Knowles. She was a botanist. I'm trying to remember where she was, but she was in Dublin. She was a botanist in Dublin. And she was the first person to recognize that if you go down to a rocky seashore, you'll see it's color-coded with lichens. On the lowest part of the shore, just above low water, there's a black layer. And then above that is an orange layer. And then above that is a kind of more gray layer that kind of fades upwards. And she was the first person to recognize that. And that's seen worldwide. And it's an ecological zonation of lichens. So there's just one person that, needs to be celebrated. And there are plenty of others. The guy who invented the seismometer, his name now, he went around bashing bits of metal on Killiney Beach or something like that. Anyway, there's loads and loads of really, really interesting people down there. And then, of course, there's the third Earl of Ross, with the huge telescope down at Birr, the Leviathan. So there's a lot of, and who was the other Parsons? He invented Turbinia. The little boat, the first steam turbine driven boat. Oh God, you should look that up. He is my hero. I can't remember his name, other than his surname was Parsons. And he came up with this idea of using a steam turbine to drive a ship. And he built one, and he wrote to the governments, the Navy, saying, I have built this ship, it's very fast. Are you interested? And they said, oh, no, we're not interested. So the Spithead Review in, I think, 1898, he just turned up with Turbinia, this ship. And he just ran rings around them, and none of the Navy ships could catch him. And so they said, yes, we'll have one of those. So I just thought it was such a fantastic way of demonstrating your invention. And I mean, really, he is, I think, one of my engineering heroes. For what he did, he came up with this brilliant invention, and the way he kind of proved it to the world. Well, you've ignored me, so I'll just turn up and crash your party and show you all up. So, yeah, marvellous chap. Charles Parsons, that was his name, Charles Parsons.
Okay, I dare say this is the subject of conversation for my morning cup of coffee with my curatorial colleagues tomorrow.
Yeah, check out the Parsons, Parsonstown it was called, Birr. They're a fantastic family.
Fascinating. And so I guess kind of this is, I don't think I probably got through 10% of the things I hope to ask you about tonight, but amazingly we've been 45 minutes talking at this stage. So kind of, Mike, I guess when you think about how far museums and kind of our work collectively have come throughout the course of your career, when you look to the future, what are you hopeful for? What are you
goodness,
for the future of museums?
I don't know. I think it's important museums are not sort of static repositories of stuff that's been collected in the past. So I go out and I've increased the collection of Jurassic ammonites and Jurassic brachiopods hugely, since I arrived kind of 25 years ago. But all sorts of things, I think we need to collect them now, because we might just think, it's just modern stuff, but it will become historical. So one of the things I did during the Brexit vote, the appalling Brexit vote, but I won't go to that. Me and my son, immediately afterwards, we went round and we harvested some of those big placards, vote Leave, vote Remain, because we thought these are going to be of historical significance. And if you want some, I still have some left. We collected quite a few. So those went into the museum, and they have actually been used in a display. And also during the kind of height of the pandemic, I went around sort of collecting things. I went around with my son, and he took photographs, for instance, of the motorway signs saying "wash your hands." What is that weird? 5 years ago, would you have thought, are they ever going to say "wash your hands" on a motorway road sign? Yeah. But they did. And then there were, for the purposes of researching the museum collections, I had to buy some beer because Brewdog, for instance, they did a thing called Lockdown Survival Kit, which was, I forgot how many cans of beer, 24 cans of beer. And some of them were called Lockdown, you see. So I had to buy this. And then, of course, I had to drink the beer. And then that's been saved. The box and the beer cans have been saved for the museum because, okay, it's only just, last year and the year before. But in 50 years' time, we'll be looking back and thinking, well, there was this pandemic. How did people cope with it? Here's a way that they did. They kind of, in a way, joked about it, made light of the fact, and had this beer lockdown survival kit. So I do those sorts of things all the time. And I think one of the senior history curators, Karen, I think she rolls her eyes with, oh, Mike's coming with something else, but
it's important. And
it is, yeah.
You have to take on that responsibility because ultimately we are collectively building the collections that are preserved for our future generations. Yes,
kind of collect the things now when you can, rather than in 30 years' time you think, oh, we should have got one of those. Yes.
But the last couple of years has been quite a singular experience in the fact that we have known we were living through a key chapter in history.
Yes.
We didn't always realize at the time.
No. It's really, it's kind of weird. I look at things that I was doing in 2019 and thinking, you have no inkling. Actually, certainly had an inkling at the end of 2019. There was definitely an inkling. I thought, oh, this is not looking good. So, let's hope that we're out of it.
Yes, and I think one thing I would quite like to look forward to would be a trip to visit Cultura with some of our members come the second week in September. I think
do. Yeah, check dates. I think it might be 17th September to 16th of October or something like that. Do, and keep us posted. We'd love to. And
I dare say, as kind of a nice outcome from this conversation, I think let's pop a date in the diary and we'll go from there. But Mike, this has been really, I could very happily sit here for hours and chat to you, and I thank you for sharing your enthusiasm. This has been such a lovely way to spend some time this evening.
No, very much enjoyed it. Anytime. Yes, it's been great.
Thank you so much. So to everyone who's been with us this evening, again, thank you all so much for taking the time. This has been one of the 120 Dublin Stories episodes hosted by Santa Rita, and tonight was a specific talk as part of the You Say You Love Me exhibition, which is a collaboration between the Little Museum, National Museums Northern Ireland, and the Department of Foreign Affairs. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much.